Hello. Welcome to this digital recording of the 2023 Andy MacMillan Memorial Lecture, given by me, Becca Thomas, Creative Director and one of the founders of New Practice. I'm really happy I was invited by RIAS and by Architecture and Design Scotland to give this year's lecture and to speak to you all about my experiences, and especially getting to follow in the footsteps of such inspiring practitioners before me, including several people I count as mentors and friends. When I sat down to write about building community, I thought first of the most obvious journeys I could share with you, about how I and my team have made spaces for and with communities over the past 13 years, about how I have focused my time on being a practical architect and designer, working within tiny budgets to create big impact by making sure that communities have places to gather, grow, share, and support each other. I could be talking about the ways in which I have centered communities in large-scale urban change, to make sure redevelopments work for everyone, including those marginalised and lesser heard voices. I could be talking about the ways I've shared knowledge and learned from my clients, including the production of a series of resources called A Building for Your Community. I could be talking about how I work as consultants within very large design teams and when working internationally, have built networks and communities with global audiences and been vital in sharing my ideas about how social and cultural capital should drive placemaking. Each of those would be a talk in itself, and I'll touch on each of them in their own time. But I think we get to build community in so many ways as architects, and we don't do that alone. Starting from those first days in the studio, gathering with your fellow first years, I certainly was, in conversation about what architecture is, about how it functions, justifying your design choices and battling through group work. Building of a design community with friends and peers is vital to shaping the architects and people we grow into. We then go on to build communities professionally through the growth of networks and the creation of connections with other urban professionals who, if we're lucky, are also invested and dedicated to making the urban experience better. And most obviously, we build communities by building buildings, by making places and spaces for people to be together. This talk is a tour of the ways in which I have learned to build community within our team, within the attendant professions of the built environment, and with the people who have invited us into their communities as part of our work, followed by some actions I feel strongly that we should all take forward into the rest of our careers. I will talk further here about how we at New Practice exercise our political will, how we work within a mission built around radical care and intersectional feminism, whilst working within an industry complicit in late-stage capitalism, and how we use our skills and our interests to make a better profession and ultimately a view of a more wonderful world to live in. My mission is really our mission. I haven't built it by myself or in isolation. My career is a dialogue with Mark Cairns, my partner, and one we have been having since 2011. We started working together as students, experimenting both informally and then through funded projects, like research for the Scottish Government about the future of architectural education, or contributing to thinking around local place plans, and initiatives like the Scottish Architecture Students' Assembly, which were our first attempts at building communities of like-minded people, testing out toolkits, temporary and interventionist approaches to holding conversations with people. This experiment developed into our first business, a project consultancy, and quite specifically not an architecture practice, which focused primarily on participatory projects, on research, and on public art commissions. The practice stems from a shared resistance to traditional practice, ways of doing architecture, and a feeling that there was room for trial and error, for building something on the edges which addressed the needs of people in the urban environment. Being able to do this, being able to take this risk, was helped by the context. Glasgow was, at the time, a city with a very low cost of living. We were surrounded by supported voices and mentors. Special shout outs here to David Page, to Jude Barber, to Ulrich Enslein, to Catherine Doherty and to Paul Stalin for all of their kind encouragement in those early days. When we quickly learned how our non-traditional practice might be formed through a mix of public and private sector work, building an expertise in talking to people about urban change and town centres, which we still draw on today. Following a number of really incredible once-in-a-lifetime opportunities to author collaborative international projects looking at place, including presentations at the 13th Architecture Biennale in Venice, the World Design Capital in Helsinki, Commonwealth Games in Glasgow, the Lahore Biennale, and the Kosovo Festival of Architecture. New Practice was then founded to expand this platform, to focus on projects with a specific goal of creating community-led outcomes through shared decision-making. We build community by building value, by centering kindness and collaboration, by building up our team and centering well-being in our approaches, by building networks that advocate for better places, and by being openly and proudly diverse. Building communities is also part of what makes our work political. The choices we make about what to build, how to build, they're all about a political position and our own mission in the world. In my view, architecture is political. Who you work for is political. Your workplace culture is political. And who you involve, and specifically who you ignore, that's all political. Building community, I think, is inherently a political act. And where I enjoy it most is progressive, it's radical, and it's inclusive. For me, the most exciting communities bring together professional and collective expertise to use all the skills fundamental in architecture to make better places to be, better cities to live in, and better places to work. I don't think this happens enough, and I need to believe in an industry that can do better. As a profession, I think we need to keep moving forwards towards putting people at the heart of our thinking and our designs. Architecture, it's in the journey. Successful places, buildings, neighborhoods, and cities, they're not about pretty pictures at the end. Instead, they are defined by their usefulness, the ways they meet and hopefully exceed any brief, and by the conversations and shared learning they offer. Pretty pictures, AI renders, 3D printed models costing thousands of pounds, those don't make good architecture, but conversation does, and people really do. And building community isn't about party politics with a capital P. That's about the politics of people and how we shape the world together. There is plenty in architecture which fails to unlock talent in the profession. We collectively suffer from a problem of vocation, by which I mean when we love what we do, it breeds an opportunity for exploitation. We see this in the chronic issues of overwork, of working for free, of working for too long, for far too little, and of undervaluing our skills and the value that architects bring. We should love what we do and understand our value. When we were first starting out, this was a particularly steep learning curve. There's a cyclical discussion in architecture around the need to diversify and reduce the flight of women, people with disabilities, people of colour, and Black people from architecture. This discussion often fails to deal with the generational wealth that bolsters many successful architects' beginnings in the profession. No matter how we practice architecture, it's obvious that being a person with privileges makes it easier to access the pathways to success. In lectures, often the most common question is, where would you start if you were a graduate today? And for over a decade, I've heard architects give this or similar advice. I would speak to my family and their network to find out who needed an architect. A lot has changed since we started a business in 2011, but this doesn't seem to be changing. How can we be bolder and more adventurous without a generous cash injection from the bank of mum and dad? Beginning an architecture practice, like any business, is costly. And when we kicked off, we didn't have seed funding, family clients, or an established professional network. And we specifically wanted to avoid the types of work that you could find through family and friends. We made a promise to ourselves to avoid one-off domestic work and privileged home extensions, which only serve to further the gap between those who have and those who have nothing. A promise we've kept to this day. Instead, we shared a desire to experiment, a sense that we really hadn't stopped learning, and the knowledge that before committing to being an architect, we wanted to do and try and see more. If Mark and I hadn't been perhaps stupidly fearless in our early 20s, living in a city with a low cost of living and without dependents, care and responsibilities, it would never have happened. And we were lucky. We often discuss hard work in architecture, but luck isn't much talked about. Maybe people are worried that the presence of luck in their story erases their hard work or their talent. I don't think that's the case. Luck looks really different for different people. In my case, I'm lucky I met the people I did along the way. I'm lucky my hard work and my talent seem to be paying off. But I know that my luck has also been helped by being a white, middle-class, grammar school educated woman, living in a relatively inexpensive city and surrounded by a strong support network. I wonder how different New Practice would look today if my luck had been a little black book of family connections. and fully funded projects from day one. I don't think I'd be telling you this story. And from the start, we worked part-time jobs. We didn't pay ourselves regularly or properly for at least 4 years, all the while pushing to be ethical employers. We didn't become employers until we were confident that the practice was sustainable enough to commit to a decent employment in terms of remuneration, in terms of length of service, and in terms of valuable experiences. We've spent years testing and trialing our ideas around how to build an excellent place to work, not just for Mark and I, but for everyone. We believe that flattening organizational structures and engaging in sometimes uncomfortable, radical honesty within and across our team has made us better bosses. And we try to remember that we're not employees. We haven't been for years. As practice directors, we have a really particular perspective on the practice, on our business, on our responsibilities, and how we work. We can, and we have, worked 50+ hour weeks, but know that we don't want that to be the culture of our practice. And being a practice runner doesn't just mean handing on the pain you might have been subjected to in previous workplaces in the "I had to do it, so you should too" school of thought, which we know is still prevalent today. For us, this means working really hard to model what we think is the right way to work. Flexibly, not too early, not too late, and managing tasks effectively so that we can handle our to-do lists within a normal working week. A reminder to us all that perfect is often the enemy of done, and done well enough. My position as a boss also means finding ways to break down the power imbalances to allow for honest conversations, whilst maintaining the flexibility myself to think of the business and in its best interests too. We offer loads of options to our team for them to tell us how to improve their employee experiences. There are anonymous surveys, they can direct message us. There are emails, we have wellbeing meetings, and we check in through a staff review at least twice a year, as well as regular coffee catch-ups and the occasional pint. And by remaining genuinely open to their suggestions and requests and being responsive when making changes, I hope we continue to be the best bosses they ever have. I'm also really happy to share, after a couple of years of successfully offering flexible working across our team, we will be trialling a 9-day fortnight in 2024. It will draw on the learning of our peers in both London and Glasgow, looking to practices like Do Architecture, Public Practice, and Field and Fowles who have blazed a trail. We're convinced these changes will lead to a happier, more productive team, more time to dedicate their ongoing research, their ongoing education to their loved ones, and to their interests out with work. We'll also be expanding both our offices in Glasgow and London over the next 6 months, bringing in new voices, new perspectives, and new people to our team. We know that all of this will mean we can offer a better model of service and delivery for our clients, while supporting our team to keep fighting the good fight. We are a women and LGBTQIA+ led practice. That statement feels really political in an industry which suffers from being too male, too stale, and too old. The profession's changing slowly, and I'm proud that we get to be part of a loud change and proud of our place in building community through representation. Why do we talk so much about being women and LGBTQIA+ led? Because it's still really rare. Our very identities are politicized by an industry that isn't built for us and doesn't build with our bodies, our life experiences, and our needs in mind. We look around and see practices talk about their diversity and their representation, while their boardroom remains white, male, and over 50. We also see practices struggle to understand that the reason they aren't attracting more diverse candidates is because they're not trying hard enough. I look at their team websites and see a sea of white men, and I know that I don't belong there. That's how I felt as a part one, and it's how I would feel now if I was back in the job market. We all need to be doing more to demonstrate to everyone, and especially to trans, disabled, POC, and Black peers, our practices are places they would be supported and respected, not tokenized. And by that, I don't mean cheesy photos with a rainbow of skin tones or training activities where we pretend to be wheelchair users to understand their experience. No, I mean genuine commitment to understanding where your voice isn't needed, and an active commitment to making more inclusive places by collaborating, by bringing on people and teams and micro enterprises into your work, by finding lesser heard voices and commissioning them, by building networks and supporting educators to ensure these young people get through higher education to practice creatively in the first place. There's a common perception that because LGBTQIA plus people have achieved some legal equalities, they face new issues at work. But many in architecture still feel they have to pretend to be someone that they are not, hide parts of their life to succeed. When Mark and I first began working together, we weren't particularly explicit about it being women and queer-led. I wasn't openly out as bisexual until many years later, thanks to internalized homophobia and growing up under Section 28. But as our understanding of those challenges grew, we realised that this was something important to be louder about and to take an active role in raising awareness. Open Plan Scotland responds to this need for solidarity, and particularly in response to media hype and culture wars that target LGBTQIA plus communities. This is something I get to watch being built, and I recognise it as a vital network for Scotland, and in particular within still shockingly heteronormative and discriminatory industry. I'm inordinately proud of my team members, of Mark, Samuel Stair and Bexy Olot, and the rest of the committee for their work in setting up Open Plan Scotland, a volunteer-led advocacy and support network for all who identify as LGBTQIA+, and study or work in architecture across Scotland. I would suggest to anyone watching this video who identifies as queer or as an ally should check them out and know there exists an opening and welcome network for you in the architecture community that encourages collaboration, community and custodianship. Many aspects of working life can feel othering, often in subtle ways. The standard policies we draw on when making our own tend to assume traditional nuclear families, but most of our team have very important relationships with chosen families, and those need to be treated in the same way as other personal commitment. Likewise, there are issues of physical and mental health particularly prevalent within the community and can be difficult to raise. I, myself, try and be open with my team and with others in the industry about my own struggles with anxiety, and particularly what that looks like when I have to do things like this and speak to people. And while it's worth reviewing things like standard policy options, a tick box approach is really insufficient. Employers need to get to know their employees and foster cultures in which people can freely express their needs and be proactive. So all our team put pronouns in emails. That's really caught on in the last few years. And that way anyone can assert their gender identity without being an exception. And then follow up and importantly intervene when those are not respected or comments are made about how people choose to dress or represent. We've had to have difficult conversations with clients and contractors, especially contractors, who are failing to live up to their well-publicised equality, diversity and inclusion policies. My whole team has experienced intervening and drawing attention to inappropriate language, graffiti and slurs being used in other workplaces, and particularly when on site. Often this is brushed aside as just the lads being lads, and there's definitely a feeling that it might be better if we stayed quiet and went away. Building community with other urban professionals has helped. On one recent project, I was able to draw two of my older design team members, both white men in their 60s, whose concerns about the language used on site were miraculously dealt with, while my same concerns have been ignored. And those relationships mean that in the case when I have had overtly sexist language hurled my way, that there's someone there to recognise and push back. Because despite all my boldness and all my belief, I find it very hard to challenge in the moment. This sort of allyship is important. And if you aren't building within a community, you can find ways to be that ally. Not about cancelling people for making mistakes. We all make them. But being clear that people should always be supported and protected in being themselves in work as in life. And much like cancelling people, you can't always get this right. Inclusive design teams, they make better places, they make better buildings, they make better policies. I don't believe that design teams should become tick boxes, but the industry does need to be more open, more accessible, and more able to bring voices into decision-making spaces. A recent reread of Invisible Women by Caroline Criado Perez has reminded me that we can articulate some of this with data about what happens when women, a literal majority of the global population, aren't involved in urban planning. They get forgotten, designed out, and made to move through spaces that scare them, that alienate them, and that make their lives harder. As Criado Perez said, this is manifestly unjust. Our work will always be a reflection of who we are and what we view as our mission. The status quo and the default to male is deeply baked in. from the ultimate patriarchies of classicism and its contemporary counterpart modernism to the current obsessions with parametrics and data-driven design, without any seeming consideration that data can misrepresent and that is not absolute truth, and that algorithms are only as good as the software engineers behind them. And that is why inclusion matters. Kinning Park, also known as KPC, is a rather wonderful example of a project led by women. Throughout its long and winding journey, this red sandstone building was built in 1913 as an extension to Lamb Hill Primary School behind it. In 1976, it became the Kinning Park Neighbourhood Centre, run by Strathclyde Regional Council, providing local residents with vital space for gathering and shared learning. A decision was made to close the facility fully in 1996. What followed was 55 days and nights of protest, led by local mothers who relied on the building for childcare, joining forces with campaigners to occupy the building. As a result, the building was passed into community operation with peppercorn rent, and after 25 years of this, the building was purchased under the rights of community transfer under the Community Empowerment Act in Scotland 2015. From the initial community activists to the artists who inhabited the space in the immediate aftermath of the occupation, to the building managers, the board, and the client team we worked with, the teams there have been led by women, with a strong representation of people of colour and New Scots as those communities have grown and governed. It's benefited from strong narratives of care, of kindness, and of peer support. I have no empirical data to back me up, but I do believe the briefing rooted in this narrative from a volunteer women-led organisation is different from the briefing they might have received from a different formation of their board or their building users, which centred more to the usual default male. The briefing here started as a mind map, an explosion of thoughts, of opinions, of wants and needs with no hierarchy or prioritisation. Through conversation, this became a brief formed around 6 headlines of accessibility, creativity, usability, sustainability, viability, identity, flexibility, and community. This also means that outcome is different. Previous proposals and previous feasibilities had featured large expansions to the building, while our work focused on maintaining the character and feeling through minimal change for maximum outcome. The redevelopment opens up the original double helix stair to aid with visibility, with safety, with security, and with access to the building. This new staircase, this updated staircase, creates opportunities for enhanced understanding of the space and allows natural light to filter down from the existing roof light. A new quiet space acts as a multi-purpose support room for a range of uses, including prayer, breastfeeding, quiet space for neurodiverse building users, and a breakout and thinking space. Where KPC had for years used colour boldly, but with no purpose, using whatever was donated to them to keep spaces maintained while avoiding a white wall, our design uses colour boldly and with a clear goal. Colour here is a powerful tool in both queering the architecture, in challenging chromophobia, but it's also the basis of the access and wayfinding strategy, with a view to supporting building users for whom written English may pose an issue. The yellow, pink, and green have become the organisational brand and identifier within the neighbourhood. This bright, colourful, warm building, full of personality, provides a space for the community in Kinning Park to come together and make new connections and continue their building of a feminist future for years to come. I'm going to repeat myself, but I think it bears repeating. That inclusive design team, inclusive teams make for better buildings. Inclusive teams make for better places. Inclusive teams make for better policies. Our central aim has always been to connect people with the decision-making that underpins their lived experience. We don't do that isolated domestic work, and we're picky about who we work with. Who you work with is political. Or we focus on working with clients where our work can impact the most people positively. The world around us can seem very black and white, with strong binaries and dividing lines of good and bad. Over the past decade or so, we've come to grips with the structures that make our cities and the places where the power lies. Often, when we talk about our practice, people gravitate to the more obviously community-focused projects like Kinning Park, and can find it more difficult to link our mission to the work we do in the sphere of developer-led regeneration at an urban scale. When we work in this sector, we're working with a select few companies. and only on projects where we know that our input can have direct, lasting and positive inputs to the neighbourhoods and the communities it affects. Whilst acknowledging that there are fundamental gaps in policy and in thought leadership in the UK which could allow for the corruption of our good intentions. You can't avoid every bad apple. And I think some of the slightly wormy apples, the ones who are backed by dubious sources or who might answer to very different goals than your own, are doing work that we think is important. And it's important to be involved with. And that's why we work in this grey space between the binaries to push these projects to be better. We get to be a local champion in very particular non-academic conversations around a changing city. And that's important work. And also we are a wider voice in those teams, bringing all competent considerations for access of lived experience and diverse audience into the projects. Importantly, these type of clients tend to have deeper pockets, and that's useful. We have a practice to keep afloat, salaries to pay, desire to continue existing in a capitalist structure, but they're also in charge of shaping bits of our cities. And when we take on work with developer clients and large private sector organizations, we're building relationships with individuals within these massive organizations that help us shape better places. The public sector can't do it alone. And more we see the most realistic way to build better is to bring together public, private and third sector clients into partnership, making sure that the framework there is rooted in place, in people and in collaboration. We have a dual base for teams based both in London and Glasgow, and we're well placed to highlight where we think professional culture, particularly in Scotland, is falling behind. In particular, we found that opportunities in London, where we work with leading British architecture practices and under the eye of officers of the Mayor of London, Greater London Authority and Transport for London, has brought us into contact with excellent examples of public sector strategy and thinking for place-based practice, whether delivered through public funds or through private developer-led outcomes. This grants us proximity to contemporary forms of practice who are pushing both design-led thinking and what it means to operate as architects and urbanists today. We continue to be part of a small group working and delivering projects on the ground out with Scotland. And we strongly believe that there needs to be more cross-pollination between Scottish practices and the rest of the UK. The current situation is a detriment to the industry here in Scotland. It creates an inward-looking perspective, which can be parochial, and that doesn't capitalise on the benefits of learning some best practice, or acknowledging where and when processes are potentially being delivered better elsewhere, including through the many English mayoral cities and the approaches that centre good growth by design. We see London-based procurement frameworks that focus on collaboration and intercultural learning with the requirement for collaborative team structures, with large practices must commission micro-enterprises, social enterprises and diversity-owned business. Whilst here in Scotland, we often feel we are battling restrictive tenders that the majority of time favour lowest prices, competition and isolation with more progressive tenders few and far between. We want to see more investment here in community-led placemaking, and especially in community-led housing. For years, this felt way more developed in Scotland than it did in England. But as their planning policy has matured, they have caught up. And too often, we are now seeing poor quality consultation here, driven by cost and lacklustre procurement, whilst elsewhere, engagement is driven by social value and quality of conversation. This gives our team the space to embed inclusion, accessibility, particularly youth engagement, through greater depths of discussion, and by spending more time with communities to deliver on their ambitions. With this learning, we've been lending our voices to wider advocacy in Scotland for braver briefs and better procurement, and have found that sharing examples with public sector organisations across the country helps broaden their definition of quality and social value, and allows for projects that includes constellations of work, each a small stepping stone towards a more nuanced and holistic regeneration in thinking of cities, of town centres and of high streets. Our hope is that we continue to see more of these approaches across the whole of the UK. But we can't just wait for all this to happen. We are ambitious, but not at the expense of the nature of our team or the workplace, not by doing work for the sake of it. We also have thought in not waiting around for an invitation. From the start of our working relationship, Mark and I knew that buildings weren't like thought pieces or engagement programs. For years, we could work within the structures that allow local and national government officers to take risks on companies like us. to a fixed headline budget of around about £10,000. And we delivered high quality work there, but no one could take a risk on us to design and deliver a building, to test our mission spatially. So we had to do that for ourselves. Our first building came about through a dollop of good luck. Mark and I, as part of a small group, were asked to take over the artist studios in which we were tenants. At that point, the organisation was unsustainable. It owed money it couldn't afford to pay. And with our architectural training, we sought to fix that and other issues with a spacious solution. A new location. In a right time, right place scenario, one of our early adopters identified another opportunity which would help us get our feet on this ladder. They supported our pitch for grant funding as part of a once-in-a-generation chance to contribute to the ongoing story of the Barras as part of the 2014 Commonwealth Game investments in the city. From 2013 to 2016, I worked to make a creative hub at 3 Ross Street exist, with not enough money and taking on plenty of risk. It's now been in operation for 8 years, during which time I've had the benefit and opportunity of existing in a building I designed. I've seen all the flaws and all the successes. I've had to work to fix some of the things that don't or have never worked, and owning up to those mistakes and resolving them where I can had made me a more considerate and humble designer, with plenty of learning to bring to our next clients. And many studios also continues to give us a platform through which to explore architecture as a way of creating socially, culturally, and economically resilient places. We're now in the early days of developing a new site with this arts organisation, in collaboration with Network Rail and community partners in the south side of Glasgow. But this time doing something completely different and looking at a live-work model for creative practice. In this way, many studios is an excellent platform for experimentation. We get to test what community can look, defining and building destinations and considering resilience and sustainability through both the current location and our plans for the future. Having multiple hats remains a really interesting way to pick up on opportunities that we find on our doorstep, and also find new ways to work collaboratively. It allows us to connect the dots between consultancy, between engagement and architecture, and by balancing huge urban scale redevelopments with hyper-local connectivity. Finally, our position working at the edges of architecture creates space for us to use our voices overtly. We have an energetic, socially and politically active team who use new practice to work meaningfully in their chosen industry, harnessing the company to make waves far beyond our project. This next bit is very personal and I may cry. What I'm about to say is very sad, and we at New Practice are still grieving. Some of you may know at the beginning of the year, one of our team members was involved in a fatal collision while cycling in the city. You won't know that a week before, I was driven into by an SUV who only just managed to bend my rear wheel. I was really lucky. Emma was a brilliant young woman, and she's sorely missed by us all at New Practice. Emma Burke-Newman was a confident, committed cyclist. She was used to the challenges of urban cycling and found joy in the freedom that a bike offers. And as a team, we have been finding our wheels again over this year and continue to be committed to making our cities safer places for walking, biking, and wheeling through the projects we work on and in our personal lives. With Glasgow School of Art and Kara Kusevich Castle Architects, we recently launched Residency for Ideas in Emma's name, which the students of GSA can benefit from. The time there to explore their ideas on what practice means, whether they want to be an architect or whether they want to use their skills for something even more world-changing. We've also been running this campaign, Waiting to Happen, which gathers stories and data about several junctions in the city centre, which our team experience daily as confusing, challenging, and concerning. At each junction, there is an intersection of multiple modes of active travel, and at each there are so many options that it becomes challenging and confusing to move through safely, without angering or impacting other road users and without placing yourself at risk. Moving through the city safely is not being addressed fast enough or effectively enough by the current policy or by safer cycling campaigns. We see this as a state of emergency, and our views have been reflected back to us through the hundreds of comments and over 1,000 responses to an initial digital survey. The responses point to active travel infrastructure remaining low priority, while our city council shares great ideas for future strategy. Lack of connection, lack of joined-up thinking, and an enduring love of motorised vehicular transport over all else still seemingly exists. We have a city with a goal to reach zero road death by 2030, but with a spike of death and serious injuries this year, and with an increasingly challenging political landscape, conspiracy theories against active travel, which gain ground. It's possible, but it's all non-sexy work. It's in creating connections between different types of infrastructure, in examining how people actually use these junctions, and working to minimize the difference between desire and design. And it's in listening to those who feel the pain and the risk of being a vulnerable road user before, after, and during the implementation of new routes, so that death and serious injury aren't our only metrics for judging the success or failure of these city streets. We are tired of waiting for it to happen. Somewhere between our professional input to large-scale urban change and active travel programs and our personal desire as activists to make change, we will continue to push for something better to happen. And breathe. There's no clean way to segue away from waiting to happen, but I really want to finish on a more celebratory piece of advocacy and activism, which centres shared learning and capacity building, rather than shared sadness. The Community Empowerment Act from 2015 and the Land Reform Act from 2003 both indicate a clear political will and policy route in Scotland to transfer assets from the hands of private owners and local governments into those of communities. We're firm believers that community-led development needs architects to be willing to share expertise and accept knowledge transfers from clients. Both sides need to engage in a truly collaborative experience for this to succeed. A building for your community is a resource we've carefully brought together at New Practice for anyone interested in community-led asset development. The series is designed for community members, for groups, for organisations looking how to learn to best approach the transformation and improvement of their buildings, of public spaces, or of built assets. These are rough guides. They bring together voices from across the spectrum of experience, from funders and support organisations like Development Trust Association and Glasgow Disability Alliance, to clients and communities. It was born out of conversations with Killing Park Complex and is a reflection on how we had each learned from the other, and both had benefited from the conversations, from the series of what ifs in building our brief and the friendship that formed between the client and the design team, which supported a shared growth and capacity. First launched in 2020 as a series of newsletters and live-streamed online conversations, which have now become a short but growing series of PDF resources which are available for free forever digitally. With 2 volumes, Community-Led Development in Scotland and Making Accessible Places, we are currently developing further resources which we hope will cover other themes for how we practice, including the involvement of young people in urban change, community-led development in the differing economic and political backdrop of England and Wales, and addressing sustainability through circular design and pushing towards net zero. The goal is to grow this resource over the next year or so to become a library for people, for groups, and for volunteer organisations to start their process as clients. Getting them to ask the right questions from the start and giving pointers on accessing funding, working with design teams, and building briefs for their best futures. Building community is how we need to work to make a better future. We can all do this by building on our own roots, by going on our own journeys, and by inviting people into our communities. Building community is a multifaceted and political endeavour. It goes beyond the mere construction of physical spaces. It requires you to have deeply honest conversations with yourself about what your mission as a practitioner looks like and what values are important to you, and sticking to even when the world around you is pushing for you to give up. This is my call to you all to recognise that every decision you make in the built environment carries inherent implications. The architecture can have huge impacts, sometimes often unintended, on people's lives. I want us to reach for more than aesthetics, for more than self-indulgent conversations about which Dutch brick is more beautiful. I think we need architecture to be a valuable tool for the creation of a better world. I want more of us to challenge the status quo, to engage with new, positive and kind technologies, and explore innovative and, above all, honest ways of working with people. Let this be a call to action to us all, to be conscious of our law, to champion inclusivity, and to actively contribute to the betterment of urbanity through thoughtful and collaborative design practices. Thank you for joining.